Ladies and gentlemen of St. Joseph, Assalamu alaikum, Ram Nam Sitaram. I bring you greetings in the good and holy name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. May I firstly express the sentiment of all protocols reserved and observed, because I have to reserve some for when the Prime Minister arrives. May I secondly say that the last time that I spoke or sat in this hall was a very vivacious pre-election meeting, as packed as this hall is today, 8 months later. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have the opportunity tonight to speak not as a person in pursuit of an electoral seat, as a member of a team in pursuit of government, but I come here tonight to give some account and information to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, those not only present now, physically seated here, but those present in their living rooms and before their TV sets and on the listening airwaves of Trinidad and Tobago, who are tuned in to hear accountability provided today to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is in a difficult situation. I was given the opportunity and privilege of being the 16th Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago and also the Minister of Legal Affairs. That privilege is something which I hold as a privilege. I made a vow to dedicate myself for the next 51 months that I have left and 8 months behind me as somebody committed to serving all of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So for that reason tonight I have not worn a red shirt, even though my heart is as red as it comes. And I say so genuinely because it's important to speak to all of Trinidad and Tobago, not only to the vast majority and the majority that voted us into power, but to those who are still yet to be convinced. And permit me to give some account to you specifically on how the ministries which I manage, has to articulate with the plan and operationality to give us the results that we're looking for. Let me explain that. You will hear our opponents busy from pillar to post all over Trinidad and Tobago talking, we want a plan, there's no plan, and then they talk about crime plan. But does it sound familiar? You remember the election, the run-up to it, Rowley have no plan, PNM has no plan, there was a large wheel being spun. And God alone knows what happened when the wheel spun. Well, part of having a plan as to what you do requires, first of all, analysis. After you engage in analysis, it requires a dedicated commitment to stating what you intend to do based upon what you have found and where you hope to find yourself. Anybody that walks in and publishes a plan from day one says to you, you have no faith that you should have in me. Because unless you adjust your system to what the reality of the position is, you are really making a mockery of the position. When you win an election, as we did on September 7th, when you form a cabinet with Attorney General and Prime Minister on the 9th, when you constitute the rest of cabinet in the month of September and you begin to appoint boards, you are still in the process of receiving information. And so as Attorney General in Trinidad and Tobago, I gave a solemn commitment in September that I would publish a written legislative agenda, and I did so specifically because if you don't have the courage to put it in black and white with specifics, then you are telling the country, do not measure what I have undertaken to perform, just wait for me to make it up while I'm going on. And I'm very proud to say that in September 2015, I undertook to publish a legislative agenda for the government as we welcome the Minister of Finance to this evening's proceedings. I undertook to publish a legislative agenda by the end of the first quarter of 2016, and we met that promise. And that promise included a statement that we would, before 2017 is done, reflect upon 41 pieces of law. Before 2019 was done, reflect on a further 30. And before 2020 was done, reflect on a further 31. With a few preliminaries in gear, it was a total of 108 pieces of law. But laws aren't only what you think you want. When you come up with a law, you have to have a policy, you have to have a prescription, you have to know how you're going to operationalize it so that people can see the effect of your laws. And your legislative agenda must be built around the elements that you want to achieve in society. And I want to let you know that when you disaggregate and take apart the legislative agenda that we have published, you will note that they fit into 6 modules or columns. Number 1, the criminal justice reform column. Number 2, taking the profit out of crime. Number 3, revenue management reform, which is associated with also having economic viability. Number 4, quality of life or social issues. Number 5, specifically children and the voice of the child. And number 6, to get a matrix of all other areas that are involved there. That's the any other category. And I want to tell you, when you hear an opposition speak as often as this one does, asking you what the plan is, a plan is not a plan because you just publish it. A plan is a plan when it articulates with the operationality of what you're doing. So tonight I don't have the opportunity to speak to all 6 elements, but I certainly intend to speak to at least 2 of them to show you how it is improving the lives of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. I'm able to tell you tonight, under the criminal justice reform, you see, let me stick a pin for a moment. There is a scourge of crime in this country. Murders are happening in this country. Rampant criminality is happening in this country. It does not lie at the feet of this government today. There must have been a build-up to it. There must have been a product. A baby isn't born one day after conception. There's gestation, there's pregnancy, there's delivery. And when you see criminality running in Trinidad and Tobago, it has to obviously be associated with something that started some time ago, that gestated and is being given birth to. It is also driven by the fact that there is a belief in this country that there is no consequence to crime. And if you can't feel the brunt of the laws being applied to you, and if people can't see that laws are being applied, then there is a disregard for the existence of laws. Bandits roll up on CCTV camera, shoot a man dead, broad daylight, and then walk away from the scene. People engage in corruption. In the last 5 years, corruption was labeled under 2 headings. I have to eat a food, and as a box train government. But I want to tell you, good people of Trinidad and Tobago, that turning the ship around has to be factored the way you would turn a large tanker around. On the sea, you don't make a sharp turn and switch the boat over on its side. You adjust the tiller, you adjust the course, and slowly you get the course being corrected until you're headed in the right direction. And I'm proud to say that the last time I heard the expression "eat a food" in this country was when the last government went out. And ladies and gentlemen, taking that reflection of where we are right now and looking at one of these columns upon which this government stands in terms of legislation, that is criminal justice reform, the first thing that we have to do is to make sure that that articulates with taking the profit out of crime. Let me ask you this. Who in this country believes that the laws that exist to deal with murder, to deal with money laundering, to deal with bid rigging are working in this country? Who could believe that when the Piarco Airport inquiry is on its 16th year in the magistrate's court? Who could believe that the law that says you will hang if you commit murder is an effective deterrent in this society if somebody is in the prison cell for 16 years awaiting a trial? Who believes that bid rigging has consequences if you can't get witnesses to step forward? Who believes that life sport has an answer at the end of it if you can't see a prosecution resulting in an example? Well, you know the definition of madness. Do the same thing the same way and expect a different result. So what has your government done about this? The first thing we did is to measure the system, recognize it is not working, and we have committed in dealing with crime and criminality to a very simple and powerful perspective. So I was saying, my mission tonight is to educate our country on how a plan is actually achieved PNM style. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying, on 2 of the 6 columns that I mentioned to you, I'm focusing on criminal justice reform, and I'm focusing now, before I get to that, on the one that articulates with it, which is the taking the profit out of crime. And I had made the submission that it is insane to consider that you're going to have a result if you focus on the laws being applied the way they are. And ladies and gentlemen, the PNM's genuine belief, the government's genuine belief, the Attorney General's genuine belief is that you must follow the money. And if you follow the money, and if you target taking the profit out of crime, then you are going to invite for a different solution. And it is for that reason that I would like us all to focus on the follow the money and taking the profit out of crime, that the published legislative agenda of the government includes the following: civil asset forfeiture legislation, which is called Explain Your Wealth legislation. I'm coming to that. Anti-terrorism amendments to the legislation. Mutual assistance in criminal matters. Amendments to the Proceeds of Crime Act. Listen to this one. Legislation for beneficial ownership. Whistleblowing legislation. Amendments to the Board of Inland Revenue, the Financial Intelligence Unit. Amendments to the money remittance sector. Amendments to the non-profit sector. Amendments to the legislation which guides how all of this interarticulates. And permit me to focus on a few of the ones that I've just mentioned to you. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that Al Capone, as the Americans knew him, was brought down not on a murder charge, not on a bid rigging charge. He was brought down on tax evasion charges. And ladies and gentlemen, our Proceeds of Crime legislation has been observed to have a fault. Proceeds of Crime legislation, where you get to forfeit assets, requires you to engage in a criminal investigation, and that criminal investigation must go through all of the court processes.
It must go in the magistrate's court. It must go to the High Court. After the High Court, it goes to the Privy Council. It may or may not go back to the magistrate's court. You don't know what's going to happen. Take Piarco Airport inquiry as one example. And your predicate crime conviction, you can only forfeit assets after you take that long run to Mars and back. So what has this government done? We have said that it is appropriate to adopt a civil law standard, go to the High Court, and don't put the burden on the state to hold somebody and say, I have proved beyond doubt, reasonable doubt, that you are guilty of bid rigging, or you are guilty of money laundering, or you are guilty of some other crime. Instead, I'm going to knock on your door and say to you, I believe that your wealth, be it a $60 million mansion, expensive cars, whatever it is, I believe that you may have some issues to answer. And in that circumstance, I'm putting the burden on you to explain your wealth. And if you can't explain your wealth, then you will lose your wealth. And ladies and gentlemen, around the world, in Ireland, in England, in the Turks and Caicos, in Guyana, elsewhere in the world, you have this law in existence. And that's a very powerful piece of law when you add it on to something else which is on the agenda, which is where we talk about unveiling the beneficial ownership. What does that mean? Everybody in this country know, quote unquote, who thief, where they are. They have no witnesses. Nobody steps forward. And then when you investigate the matter, you find a company where the shareholder owns the asset, owns the company, which owns the house or the boat or the business. And after the shareholder owns that, it turns out the shareholder really has a beneficial ownership and is hiding the real owner away from public scrutiny. And so, on our legislative agenda, in taking the profit out of crime, we must unmask the true owners. And therefore, we must ensure that the company's laws are amended, that a register of beneficial owners is put into place. So you must declare, I am the shareholder of this company, but I don't really own the shares. I own it in trust for this person. And then you match up the revenue that acquired the asset for the beneficial owner. And if you can't match it up, you now turn to your civil asset forfeiture. And then what do? Obviously, you must make sure that the inland revenue has the ability to share information with the prosecutorial services, including the Financial Intelligence Bureau, a subset of the TTPS, the ACIB, the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau. And therefore, you link now the prosecutorial arms with the information management arms. Because you've heard the Auditor General say, I can't get information, I can't pursue life sport, I can't pursue that because I'm not given information. The definition of insanity is to leave that alone. The product of a government that is thinking is to publish it and put it on your legislative agenda and to do as we have done, which is to draft the laws already and to have them in public consultation now. And ladies and gentlemen, apply that now to the first column I spoke to you about. It's good. You capture all these people. You get them on an easier standard of law. You reverse the burden. You encourage the sharing of information. But what you're going to do with them when the criminal justice system takes 15 years to prosecute someone? What you do is you engage in operationalizing the laws in tandem with your counterparts. And as Attorney General, I can tell you, ably armed with Minister Stuart Young, I can tell you that we have engaged in active, constant dialogue with the DPP, with the judiciary, with the international supporters of us, the Canadian High Commission, the British High Commissioner, in the criminal justice reform sector, with all of the articulating arms, and I am proud to tell you, your legislative agenda therefore includes elimination of preliminary inquiries. You cut out 5, 6, 7, 8 years out of the mix. You tell the DPP, decide, you're going for an indictment or you're going for a summary offense. You're going to the High Court straight or you're going to the Magistrates Court. Which one? You say on your legislative agenda that you will commit to removing trial by juries for certain offenses. Who is turning up in gun-related matters to give evidence where there's fair? Who is turning up in serious crime and complex fraud? You then say that you must make sure that the agencies that have to prosecute have the manpower. And that is where you take your DPP's department and you ensure that the DPP is adequately staffed. You take your Attorney General's office, you make sure that the hundreds of contract workers are absorbed into the permanent establishment. You say to Trinidad and Tobago, where you have the right of choice of counsel, people are in the court, there's a limited criminal bar, there may be 10 or 12 lawyers available, hundreds of people using them, trials are delayed because they say, my lawyer busy, you have 10 other matters. You establish a public defender's system and you say after strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, if that is what it is to be, you get competent counsel and your trial starts. You say, as we say on our agenda, you engage in getting rid of the backlog on the list by engaging in plea bargaining, by engaging in consultation with judiciary and bench and bar, as we have done. Have you noticed that the Attorney General's office has been busy giving you the statistics in Trinidad and Tobago, not in Canada, not in England? You notice the talk about pardon or conditional release, as it should be called, happened after we revealed the fact that there were 2,000 plus people in remand yard, some of them over 16 years. Do you know that it costs us in this country $25,000 per prisoner to keep them in jail for 1 month? Do you know that in Trinidad and Tobago we have incarcerated, for example, a woman for not paying a fine of $12,000, we put her in jail for a year? Do you know that witness protection program is running at hundreds of millions of dollars and there are people in witness protection for over 15 years? You see, these statistics you don't know because they would have never been told to you before. The same way we have dealt with children and child marriages and forced marriages and divorce and the voice of the child. But when you start to tell the judiciary, we will support you, go and look for temporary judges, go and we will give you courts, you do like we did and you operationalize laws. Do laws change culture or does culture change law? Which one is it, as Minister Dialsing often asks? Well, how many of you thought that it was impossible to obey the speed limit in Trinidad and Tobago? How many of you have thickened and well-muscled calves now because you're restraining on the accelerator? You see, that is a tribute to taking law and operationalizing it. And as we do in the Motor Vehicle Authority, which again deals with crime, what we are doing is plucking out one by one the laws that work. And on the criminal justice side, we are looking at the manpower issues. We are looking at the conditional release issues. We're looking at the case flow analysis issues. And trials by jury have to be dealt with. Preliminary inquiries have to be dealt with. I'm going to get another note from Minister Robinson Regis in a second. And what this means, ladies and gentlemen, is that when we look to the statement that you have to have a stated crime plan, you are smarter than that. The first thing you have to do is to tell them, have nothing to say when you for 6 years could not publish in writing a legislative agenda. The second thing that you say is have nothing to say when you never once opened the doors on statistics in this country. The next thing to say to them is have nothing to say when you have failed to do something for 5 years. Because I'll tell you this, As we move to enforce red light enforcement, you break a red light, you're going to get a ticket in the mail. As we move to enforce penalties for motor vehicle offenses, where you don't pay your fines, it goes on your point system, those are regulations to be put into effect, which we have drafted already. And it's coming soon. Do you know, Trinidad and Tobago, that in the period ending 2009, the Motor Vehicle Authority had digitized, as it was coming on stream, the licensing authority had digitized the entire records of Trinidad and Tobago. The government then spent, the last government, time on putting a new motor vehicle authority, and that new motor vehicle authority, they spent close to $500 million on it. But you know what they didn't do? They didn't put a single digital record into the system for 5 years. So there was no focus on operationalization at the same time that you deal with it. I have 1 more minute. I want to tell you this. Trinidad and Tobago has sat as the chair of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. I am the chair of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. And what we have done is to take a leading role, as the Prime Minister has done in CARICOM, and we have managed to do in 6 to 8 months what 5 years prior has not happened. And that has included bringing together the Caribbean, and specifically watching how the other jurisdictions who are now helping us have operationalized their laws. And the last point that I will give you, as we look to the SSA, as we look to the mechanism that we did to appoint a commission of police, as we look to the operationalization of whistleblowing legislation, the implementation of public procurement, campaign finance reform, civil asset forfeiture, taking the profit out of crime. Let's take a lesson from our CARICOM neighbors. Jamaica has a major organized crime agency which looks, smells, and feels just like the SSA. You know what clothes them? No legislation. They don't even have a piece of law to govern it. The opposition and the government agreed that they would fly a plane whilst it was being built. They said crime was too important. Major crime, organized crime, money laundering was too important to get a perfect piece of law. And what they did was took a cabinet decision supported by opposition, and they are busy fighting crime and taking the profit out of crime. But what do we have as I end in Trinidad and Tobago? We have a leader of our opposition saying they're going to sue on every piece of law that we put into effect. So they have brought challenge against the method to appoint a commissioner of police. They bring in challenge against the SSA. She says she has no faith in me as Attorney General, and I want to say on that point, I am very pleased to not have her confidence, because Mrs. Prasad Bisessa's confidence is placed in people of the kind of Anand Ram Logan and Gerald Ramdeen, and if those are the examples of people she has confidence in, I want no part of her confidence. But I want to tell you, Trinidad and Tobago, it is time for us to be intellectually honest. It is time for us to understand that there is a clear and precise plan that has been published that you can rely upon. We will drive getting the profit out of crime. We will drive our legislative agenda, and I will leave it to our Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to fill in some other articulating elements which work in tandem with the work that the Attorney General's office is doing. And I thank you, as short as the opportunity was, for the opportunity to address you tonight. God bless you.